お待たせいたしました。
Thank you for waiting. We would now like to begin with the second part of our program, Session 1, Japan's renewable energy status before and after the feed-in tariff system, photovoltaics, wind, geothermal, biomass, Japan's renewable energy industries. We would like to ask Ms. Mika Obayashi from JREF to act as moderator of this session. Thank you. So we would now like to begin this session 1 to talk about the current status of Japan's renewable energy industry. As you know, last year FIT was introduced into Japan. We spent almost 15 years debating its implementation, and at last our dreams were realized and we were able to see the FIT system in Japan. So it is still not enough time has passed for us to do a complete comparison of the situation before FIT and after FIT, but still, I think we can see that in some areas, such as for photovoltaics, we've seen tremendous differences after the implementation of FIT. For other renewable energy sources, we have not seen as great results. So, although we don't have an overall assessment yet, we can at least have an update as to each industry in the renewable energy sector, and we would like to ask different persons from each industry to speak on their industry. I'd like to ask first Ms. Izumi Kaizuka, the manager of the research division of RTS Corporation, to talk about photovoltaics.
Good morning. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name is Kaizuka, and I'll be talking about PV power generation. And compared to other energy, it is said that we have seen some introduction of PV power, but there are still issues, and I would like to share some thoughts with you. So this is only a flash report, but this gives the trends of the PV installed capacity, about 2 giga. And also the shipment is about 2,500, but I think up to introduction and connection with the grid, it takes some time. So I think it's about 2 gigawatts. Compared to 1.2 of previous years, it has grown. It's not just the amount that had grown, but in 2011, you see that about 80 to 85% is used for residential PVs. But with the introduction of FIT, we see non-residential usage as well. We see an expansion of non-residential markets. And here, under the FIT program, this gives you the approved facilities. So by year end, the FIT would need to be applied for the tariff for 2012, and the deadline was the 22nd actually. And METI probably is still working hard on it, so we only have data up to November of last year. And introduction over 3 gigawatts have been observed at this time frame. And sorry, this is a very busy slide. This is by prefecture regarding approved projects. This gives an overall view. So when we look at the capacity, 22% would be the residential usage, and those over 1 megawatts, the massive scale, would be over 40%. So the market segment has dramatically changed from before. In the green bar is over 1 megawatts. And in Hokkaido and Kyushu, you do see that there are quite a number of mega solar plants underway. And the residential usage is mainly in the metropolitan area. So this is the different situation by prefecture. You see that some prefectures are very aggressive in having projects. So there are differences, and some prefectures are starting bids. So we do see some regional effort. So now we'll see figures for fourth quarter of 2012, and you see shipment, the green, you see growth in the large scale, and I think the share of the residential would be between 85 to 70%. And imported modules are increasing as well. So maybe close to 30% would be imported modules. However, among them, there are some that are imported as OEMs from Japanese companies, and modules made by China and Taiwan brought back to Japan. And one change is that up to 2011, the PV industry, it was supported by PV cell manufacturers and construction firms. But now we do see a lot of new players coming into the picture after FIT. So there's an increasing number of PV players after the introduction of FIT. You see big names here, but the construction market is very good and solid at the moment. So construction firms and also those regional construction houses are starting installation of solar panels, and we do see the pyramid becoming larger. However, regarding the PV system, compared to other renewable energies, the price is still high. And as Thomas had mentioned before, in Japan, the PV prices compared to Germany is still high. And now, with the start of the FIT system, efforts to reduce the price is very important. Now, in the housing industry, 8.4% in the residential and 14% for more than mega, we do see such decline. But we will need to deregulate further and see how we can reduce costs in racks and mounting devices, etc. There are still a lot of issues, and to further disseminate PV, we need to reduce costs. That's one thing. And in order to do that, we need to consider the best supply chains to pursue standardization and also reduce costs due to regulation. And also, it's very important to be able to have it anywhere, everywhere. And different authorities are taking care of land in Japan, so it may take time. Transition from agricultural land, for example, will require many years. So the regulation would need to be accelerated. And now having panels, a light module would be appreciated as well, so that it could be used. And the big bottleneck would be that being able to have a ubiquitous PV. There are many projects of PV in Hokkaido, but the issue of strengthening the grid connection is also important. Solar cells would generate power during the daytime, so it may sound awkward, but we want to have ubiquitous PV available anywhere and everywhere and cheap, and we would need to prepare for the overcoming the issue of the limits in the grid connection. So combining with the pumped energy in combination with other renewable energies may allow for better usage of renewable energy in the electricity package. We hope that we can see more diffusion of PV in the future. That's all for me. Thank you very much.
Then may I ask one question about this?
You talked about the feed-in tariff price, and you see that the prices are still high, and the price declines in the residential and for the industrial usage. And now the government is about to review the tariff at this very moment, and we have heard from the DJ that maybe a decline by 10% can be seen. And what will be the impact of that to the market? How do you see that? So if it's about 10% or so, I think that there will be stagnation of the market, because the price itself is showing a decline, and non-residentials were not an area what we've seen. But EPC firms, for example, are engaged in many projects, and through the learning curve, they are able to suppress the cost, I believe. So if it's about 10%, I think it will not stagnate the market. So when we looked at Mr. Son's market, we see that there are many players in the market, so we should not stop the momentum was mentioned, and I believe the momentum will continue, right? That's how you see it. 2 gigawatt and 3 gigawatts would be the level required per annum, right? Thank you very much. Kaizuka-san, thank you very much. Big round of applause for her, please.
We would now like to continue with the wind power representative from Eurus Energy Holdings Corporation, the executive advisor, Mr. Tetsuro Nagata. In regard to wind power, we are not seeing the positive effects of the FIT system as of yet, so I'm sure Mr. Nagata will talk in some detail about that. Hello, I've just been introduced. I'm from Eurus Energy Holdings Corporation. My name is Tetsuro Nagata, so I'm going to talk about these topics today. And in regard to how much wind power we've seen in Japan, I think Soya-san from GBEX has come today, but we have some information about 240 million as of last year, 2.64 gigawatts. So we've seen about a 40,000 kilowatt increase. So we have 262.64 gigawatts. So in other words, in the world, we've seen about 40 million gigawatts increase. But what, therefore, is the situation in Japan? In 2012, again, we're using some predictive information as well. We don't have final information yet. But these are the numbers that we see. We are seeing some improvement. However, I think we can say basically installation is flat. In 2011 and 12, we saw that we were moving from the RPS system to the FIT system, and so as a result of this transition, many people thought that if there's going to be a higher price put on after the FIT system, we would just wait and see. And as a result, this has led to actually a slight, not a decrease, but at least a stalling of the expansion of the market. So in regard to 2012, for the Japan Wind Power Association and for the Japan Wind Power industry, there were many large events that were held or that occurred. One, of course, was the FIT implementation. One other event or thing that affected us was that as of October of last year, the requirement was made that to build a wind power plant, you had to undergo an environmental assessment study as well. Until now, of course, such things had been done, but now it was considered to be something that you had to do by law. And this is something, of course, that will take a great deal of time, 3 or 4 years. It will also take about 100 million yen. It's very, very sad because that first 3 years of the FIT system, we have a very, very high prices set. It was going to be a very profitable time for the wind powers industry. However, because of this new development that we have to do this environmental assessment, means that we're not able to take advantage of this FIT system. Of course, in regard to renewable energies, the main 3 parties fundamentally have agreed to this policy, and so fundamentally they're going to be supporting our activities. Having said this, however, each party has a slightly different stance in regard to nuclear energy, and as a result, with this lack of unity among the political parties in regard to nuclear energy, we cannot have a final sort of assessment about what is going to be the energy policy for renewable energy sources going forward. So we see that Aomori Prefecture up north has the most wind power plants, and then on number 2 is Hokkaido, the northernmost island. And these two regions always basically are always battling for the number 1 position, and number 3 is usually Kagoshima down in the southernmost part of Japan. So it's funny that we have, again, this, not funny, but it's extraordinary that we have this wind power potential at the extremities of Japan, and this leads, of course, to another problem that we have, which is the lack of power grid facilities. So here we have on the horizontal axis the prices, 22 yen is at the minimum, and then on the vertical axis we have this chart at the bottom, the years represented. So we have 8% basically is something that is implemented for the first 3 years, and after that, that figure will drop. And depending on how much there was in terms of output, etc., the future figures will apparently be determined or affected. Also, in regard to the FIT system, one positive thing was that it was applicable to existing systems as well. And basically, that's going to be about, the feed-in tariff surcharge is going to be about 80 yen per household per month. And about 40 yen is for new installations and 40 is for existing. So when photovoltaics and wind power plants increase in number, some people are saying that might represent a larger burden on consumers in the future. However, but if we consider that the burden for existing facilities is still quite low, I don't think it's going to be such a huge problem. When we see that Germany, when there was, for example, a tenfold increase in other words, it went to a new level of capacity installation, then there was a significant increase in the burden borne by consumers. For us, I don't think it's going to be a problem in the near term. So, again, we also do not really have a reflection on the pricing that reflects the situation for offshore wind, because there is not enough sort of data for offshore wind that has been verified. There is also a problem that remains in regard to connecting with the existing grid. Again, at present, the grid operator can say we have room or we don't have room. So there is no guarantee that the grid access can be secured. The RPS system did guarantee that. So again, each system has some positive aspects and negative aspects. Then when we talk about the actual potential of wind power, if we do a simple calculation, wind speed of 6.5 meters per second at 80-meter height, we can basically say that these are the figures that we have for the wind potential in Japan, but this is just mechanical calculations, and whether these figures really are viable or not is something that, again, are going to have many more different restrictions placed upon us. For example, you cannot have, for example, very steep inclines cannot be built upon. You cannot build on mountaintops that are over 1,000 meters high. You're going to also have noise control constraints, etc. So maybe 16 million kilowatts might be the highest potential. If we can achieve even that, 30 million kilowatts is perhaps, we think, a good target is or safe target to have, is what we're saying in this chart. As you can see by this chart, the potential in Hokkaido, this is the bar graph, is very, very high. The red line, however, shows you the electric power company capacity or the utility grid transmission lines constraints. So this, you can see, we have problems, as I said earlier, in Hokkaido and Tohoku, northeastern part of Japan region. So we have great wind potential, but again, we don't have that grid capacity. In another way of saying is that in Tokyo we have tremendous grid capacity, but we don't have this wind potential. So this shows you the mid and long-term target for wind power. We have about 25 million kilowatts as potential for offshore. However, we're seeing that there are distinctions between offshore and onshore, in that there are restrictions about where you can build again in offshore capacities. We also have another problem, as I'm sure many of you are aware, that we have different voltage between Western Japan and Eastern Japan. So the interconnections between the two parts of Japan is perhaps something that definitely needs, not perhaps, but definitely needs to be worked upon. For example, we have cables being used to link different areas. But as I've mentioned earlier, for example, being able to use the northern part of Japan, the tremendous wind power potential that they have, the fact that it cannot be used and transmitted to the rest of Japan, which very much needs this. We need to, for example, reinforce not only the grid transmission networks infrastructure within the regions of each utility, but also throughout the nation itself. I talked to you about some of the constraints that we're facing. Some other constraints that we're facing have to do with government regulations. I told you also already about the first topic, which has to do with the environmental assessment regulations that are now applicable to wind power, but also there are agricultural land use restrictions. For example, type 1 agricultural land is almost going to be impossible to build upon. Type 2, type 3, there might be some leeway to build there. We also have something called the Building Standards Law. Again, this is something that has to be resolved in some way. We also have other restrictions in regard to building in national parks and building in woodlands that are considered to be protective woodlands, protecting inner lands from oceans, wind, etc. But of course, I can't just talk about the negative aspects. We have to talk about positive aspects as well. I believe that there are some 20,000 components or parts that are going to be used in wind power facilities, which present a tremendous opportunity for the Japanese manufacturing industry. And in regard to the components, we don't have too many wind tunnel manufacturers, but even though there are many foreign wind mill manufacturers, wind power plant manufacturers, many Japanese component manufacturers send things. For example, in regard to bearings, there's something about it would be better if we had percentages for all of the different components that are being used. But we also see that these manufacturing facilities for these components are scattered throughout Japan. And also, again, going back to this offshore facilities, this is something that we definitely do want to promote as a new industry. As Mr. Takahara mentioned earlier, that this is something that we very much need to focus on. Of course, onshore and offshore both, I think, are very, very important. So this was a very, very quick presentation, but thank you very much for your kind attention. Mr. Nagata, thank you very, very much. May I ask you a quick question? Compared to photovoltaics, I don't think you have as much vitality or energy. And as a result, I can see this part because your numbers are very, very low. But wind power is very, very competitive abroad and growing abroad. And you had many, many different kinds of requests and demands that you were making of the government, etc. But what is it that you most want to focus upon? We're putting together a press release yesterday, and there was some talk about access to the grid, but this is something that is also a problem with mega solar as well. This transmission system being built, of course, is a very, very important aspect, but of all of these different problems, what is the biggest problem that you see in Japan, and especially in comparison to foreign environments? When we talk about photovoltaics and wind power, in a sense, we're friends, but on the other hand, we're also competitors and rivals. And so the environmental assessment handicap is something that is very, very much constraining the wind power industry. Over the 1, 2, or 3 years, I think that environmental assessment requirements somehow needs to be streamlined as much as possible, made easier, made faster. That's the most pressing problem facing us. I don't mean to criticize photovoltaics, but of course, we're our rivals, and actually, Eurus, my company, actually is involved in both industries. But in many ways, the photovoltaics are easier. I don't mean to be insulting, but anybody can get into this business, and the returns are very, very high. But again, wind power is profitable, but again, there are many, many sort of handicaps that we're burdened with. There are many, many constraints that we're burdened with. There are many, many discussions going on in order not to increase the surcharge. We're talking about 20 yen, 40 yen. It would be better to increase wind power as much as possible. If we want to truly increase renewable energy sources as much as possible, it's best to focus tremendously on wind power expansion, because it will not increase the burden on consumers. I mean, no, there was a debate earlier about making all of the surcharges the same, but there are many different energy sources. And we have to take the differences in their situations to launch feed-in tariffs. And I understand that argument as well. And it's better to have a varied menu. But again, this 40 yen, I wonder if that's a very high figure. Thank you very, very much. I think, first of all, there's this thing about existing technologies and about future technologies. And FIT basically wants to try to help struggling technologies to try to really accelerate its development and become very, very popular. And when I look at the photovoltaic department and I see about the overseas market, we're seeing how fast prices have fallen. So certainly we want, as an organization, as a country, to look at all the differences and characteristics of each industry, but also to promote all of them. Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Nagata. So we'd now like to move on to the next presentation.
So we'll go on to the next set of issues that we are facing in Japan, and this will be a discussion on biomass. And so I'd like to call upon Mr. Kajiyama to speak to us today about the biomass issue in Japan. First of all, one thing that's different with biomass from the other types of energy sources that needs to be recognized. Now, the biomass is mainly used for acquiring heat. Now, with the photovoltaic and wind, it can be used mostly for the power generation, whereas with biomass, the main purpose for biomass might be for heat. And there is the woody biomass, and there's also agricultural waste biogas. So these are the two main types of biomass, and the two need to be discussed separately. And so after the introduction of FIT in Japan, we have seen that there are many projects and plans for introduction of biomass plants. However, once we do go and investigate the situation, one would be surprised to see the kind of the biomass plants which are being suggested. Most of them are over 5 megawatt in scale, and we have also seen 27 megawatt plants. Of course, in comparison to the use of fossil fuels, as far as biomass plants are concerned, these are relatively large plants, and most of these are financed by foreign capital, so very little, if any, of domestic plants. And so what the community is asked to do is to provide the fuel, and because the FIT price is set as 12,000 yen. However, if you do visit these plants, most of the times they are being offered a much lower price. And for biomass generation, it's very important to first of all consider the supply chain for the supply of biomass, which means that you have to look at the forestry industry in the area and to see what size or what scale of biomass plant would be most suitable for the area. However, most of the projects being suggested are 5 megawatts. And the generation efficiency is only about 20%. About 80% of the potential of the biomass is thrown away because there is no use of the heat. Now, in case of the Germany, there is already requirement to purchase such power, but we don't have that yet in Japan. So when we consider the supply chain, we have to look at the forestry industry in Japan. Now, after the Second World War, most of the forests had been felled, and after that there had been reforestation, and now we are seeing an accumulation of the stockpile of forest resources, which amounts to about 6 billion cubic meters, which is about twice that that's available in Germany. However, we have very little experience of thinning these forests and then shipping those thinning wood outside of the forest. We don't have people who are trained in this area. We don't have a sufficient network of forestry roads, so that even if a large-scale biomass power generation is built, we are not able to cope with such size. And this is what a forest area would look like in Japan. And in the Tohoku area, which was hit by the earthquake, you will find that the mountainous areas, the forests, all look like this. So there is readily available resources for biomass. However, why is it that the price is so high? The forest residue is priced at 32 yen, and regardless of the size of the plant, the price for forest residue is the same. And of course, the larger the plant, there will be a better efficiency in power generation, and that's the reason why most of the plants which are being suggested are of larger scale. And then there are also no requirement for the purchase of the heat, so that it's only being utilized for power generation, and also that it is being wasted. Now, if we look at the material that had been supplied as far as the basis for the price of FIT, it was at 32. However, in the earlier part, the pricing originally was at 20 yen. However, because it was suggested that the procurement committee will consider the pricing, they decided to raise the price to 32 yen, and that's what it was accepted at. And so what do we do if we are going for a small size power generation? We need to have the biomass that is best is fit for suitable for the size. We also need to look at the utilization of heat, and there are also some technology here which are being used in Europe, such as gasification, and also the organic ranking cycle, which is already being used in Europe. However, we do not have that technology yet in Japan. Also, gasification and also the organic ranking cycle are some of the things that need to be considered in Japan. And as we said, the main utilization of biomass should be heat usage, because you'll be able to reap about 80% of the worth of biomass for heat. So that should be the major premise for use of biomass. However, there's a lot of confusion on this because the construction cost right now in Japan is 5 times that of Germany. The capital cost is very high. So if it's a 300 kilowatt size boiler, in Europe, it will cost probably around 12 to 17 million yen. However, in Japan, that is 5 times that, or 70 million yen, or even 100 million yen. So there needs to be much better cost analysis being conducted to identify the reasons as to why these plants are costing so much. And we also would like to look at biogas usage. And so if it's organic waste, which means that there should be biogas available to be used. In Germany, there are over 7,000 plants in operation utilizing biogas. Now, in Japan, the purchasing price for biogas is set at 39 yen, which is quite high. However, if we go to the actual plants, is very little interest in biogas, because we have a lack of knowledge and expertise on the use of biogas. And so they keep making the same mistakes because there is no way of training these people to have better knowledge and utilization. And so the major problem here is that no one has the expertise to be able to design the plants, regardless of for biomass or biogas. Now, we have to have those experienced people, and many of these plants are custom made, which means that they need to be designed to meet the requirement of the area. The plant manufacturers have no idea, so they simply design and deliver the plants, and they are charging 5 times that cost of what is being charged in Germany. Here are some photographs showing the reality of forestry industry in Japan. And as you can see here from here, because there's no technology and there is leading her to the destruction of the forestry, and there's no regard for her workplace hygiene or her safety. You can see that they're using a chainsaw. However, they have no protective clothing whatsoever, which means that if you are hit with a chainsaw, that you could have a major injury, or in some cases you could even die from this. And there are no dedicated forestry machinery available, and so this is known as a forestry machinery, but this is a very dangerous one, because if you load this truck with lumber, then it will then lean backwards, and so it is very dangerous to use such machinery. When you tell the manufacturer that point, when then they will tell you, well, it's your fault because you are loading this truck over the upper limit. And so the reality is that it is beyond imagination of someone who has common sense. And so the entire supply chain should be designed in a way that can make better use of the resources. Thank you very much for your presentation. And so while there's a lot of talk about FIT, I guess that it's not being utilized to its full potential. You've mentioned that the capital cost here is 5 times that of Germany. And so what is the main reason for that? Well, there was no regard really for cost, or that there was not cost consciousness, because there had been a subsidy, sometimes 100% subsidy, and that's the reason why the plant manufacturers or designers gave no regard to being cost conscious. And with regard to boilers which are being used, there are so many different types available. However, there are no boilers designed for the purpose of use in the forestry environment. And very often, many of the plants are excessive in its scale or scope. And there is very often supply of overcapacity being built in. Well, thank you very much. Well, in the following session, there is going to be some discussion on the cost. And so I hope that we will have some of your speakers here who will also be able to comment on her cost. Because while there's a lot of interest in FIT, the other components are not being addressed sufficiently. And so we'll go to the next speaker.
So we'd like to now move to the next speaker, which is Mr. Ehara. And it's going to be talking about Professor Ehara about geothermal. We have a tremendous amount of potential in Japan, but very, very actual geothermal facilities in Japan. So I am Ehara. I'm sure that many of you here today may not be that familiar with geothermal energy, but we have tremendous potential in Japan here, and we also have tremendous technologies here as well. However, we are not seeing much progress in this area. Therefore, we'd very much like for you to all become fans of geothermal energy and support us in our activities. So in regard to our potential, this shows you on the left-hand side, we have the horizontal axis, the number of active volcanoes, and the vertical axis shows you about the potential for geothermal energy production. And you see that Japan is very high on the list here, on the chart here. And this is something that I would like very much to bring to your attention, which is that we can use geothermal energy 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. The green area shows you the installation capacity, showing the left-hand side is geothermal, and then in the middle you have wind, and on the right-hand side you have photovoltaic. But in regard to the yellow, which shows you the actual output of energy, you see that although there are more installed facilities for wind and solar, they are not using all capacity, whereas for geothermal, we have tremendous potential to be used. This shows you geothermal power generation trends throughout the world, and then in Japan. The upper chart shows you the world, and down in the bottom we have the Japan situation. You can see that there was a kind of a drop-off. So there was a beginning of an increase after the oil shock, and yet we've seen that, however, although Japan followed a similar trend, it's been left behind by the rest of the world, because in other areas of the world we are seeing more facilities being built in this area. Why are there fewer facilities for geothermal? And there are several reasons for this. One is that for a long time there was a tremendous prioritization of nuclear power in Japan. Of course, this has changed after March 11th of Fukushima, and the Democratic Party, when it was in the government, very much pushed renewable energy sources and distancing away from nuclear power. However, with the elections, the current political parties in power have not taken a very clear stance about what they think about nuclear energy, not completely abandoning it. So another problem that we faced us was this cost problem. It was said for a long time that this and other actually renewable energy sources were much more expensive than 2 or 3 times as much as nuclear energy costs. Of course, now we know that the situation has changed completely. And also, I'd like to point out that especially if you look at the costs over a long term, say 40-year period, you see that existing energy sources using natural resources that we already have is going to be much, much better for Japan in the future and less costly in Japan in the future. We also have another problem for geothermal power generation in that much of the, more than 80% of the promising land areas for development lie in national parks. And again, they are very, very strict laws prohibiting development of facilities. There are different types of national parks, and type 1, type 2, type 3. They are becoming a little bit more the government is becoming a little bit lenient and more reasonable about type 2 or 3, but not in regard to number 1 type of national park land. Another problem that we face is very similar in that much of potential or promising land for geothermal energy development is closely related to the onsen or hot springs resort areas. And there is great anxiety on the part of many hot springs related persons. In fact, there's a group of people who are vehemently opposed to the building of geothermal facilities, thinking that it might endanger the hot springs and the hot springs related businesses. So again, this is kind of a chart that shows you basically some of the things that I've talked about, some of the problems that we face. On the top left-hand corner, we have the economic risk. There's a very long lead time. There's a risk in about developing underground resources. There is the cost that has been mentioned by other people about developing transmission lines. There's also competition with other energy resources, and there are technical issues that also are in this field. And because of this, investments were very much very slow. But however, we are now reaching an important changing point. And as has been mentioned earlier, we are now in the post-FIT system implementation period, and the area indicated in red show you the amount of new installations that are being planned. However, in regard to geothermal, we are seeing in 2002 basically 0 applications or prospects for new facilities being planned. So I'm racing through my presentation, but again, I'd like to go back that there are 3 major problems that are facing us. One is the cost problem, one is the national parks problem, one is the hot springs problem. And I'd like to give you an update as to where we are with all of these points. In regard to the cost problem, the fact that FIT has come in is very much helping us. We're also having more government-sponsored surveys or government-supported surveys that are making our work potentially easier. In regard to the national parks issue, I think on surface things look right, but I think the ministry is involved need to, especially the Ministry of Environment, needs to be more flexible. The hot springs onsen problem is something where we have guidelines that are very problematic. There needs to be more clarification and maybe perhaps some changes. We also need more local understanding of local governments as well as local communities. We'd like to create communities that benefit both the hot springs resort communities and geothermal energy power production. So over the next few years, never take 10 years or so, I'd like to give some forecasts about how things might change. In regard to the cost problem, we're getting a lot of forward progress as a result of government support and as a result of the FIT system. Another problem that we're facing has to do with, again, environmental assessment. This was also very similar to what was said with the wind power person. It takes maybe 4 years to get this assessment. If basically we have a 42,000 kilowatt facility that is being planned, but it's a very large facility, but it's probably not going to be built until 2020 because of the very long time it takes for various work. But the environmental assessment is a very, very large part of that. We want to perhaps decrease from 4 years to at least half of that figure. In 2020, though, we do have several thousand kilowatt projects that are being worked upon. Also, some small hot springs related development, binary cycle power generation facilities. And we hope that this area will be improved quickly if we can solve the national parks problem. So this basically represents our situation. Thank you very much. I hope really personally that you are able to show results before 2020. But this perhaps is related to some other industries as well. But geothermal is very, very closely related to the local communities. In fact, you're going to developing geothermal power production in hot springs resorts. What are some business models that you have in mind? Well, in regard to large-scale projects, probably might be difficult for local community participation. But if it's a small scale, for example, the hot springs power generation kind of projects, without, for example, digging new wells, we can use existing wells that are no longer being used. If we can have local understanding, I think there are many, many possible ways to cooperate in it. With this local cooperation and small-scale projects, we can eventually lead to large corporations. You're talking about small-scale, several thousand kilowatts, etc. And you're also talking about the fact that there are other uses of geothermal besides just power generation. There are other benefits that might be followed upon. Yes. In regard to geothermal energy, we were talking about geothermal energy basically in the context of renewable energy sources and climate change. But now there's this another dimension that is brought to the surface, which is how to promote the revitalization of local communities, how to use the byproducts of geothermal energy production, for example, heat, and how, in other words, to present a local community with a project that is not only power generation, but also heat production. Thank you very, very much. So again, another round of applause for Mr. Ihara. Thank you. And as I mentioned earlier, we would like to continue on with the next session right away. And as for the experts in the renewable energies who have just presented to us, we would like to combine the discussion with the next session. Now, we have talked about FIT, and while we are seeing photovoltaic being introduced in a larger scale, there is still many issues which need to be addressed. And so may I invite the next set of speakers to come to the stage and prepare for your sessions. So that will be Mr. Nakamura and Mr. Amendaris.
Thank you very much. So please stretch. Please raise your hands. And we've been able to have a lot of discussion. So I see that some of you are resting, so please stretch and relax. So we'd like to move on to something more exciting. We'll have more exciting discussions in the afternoon as well. So we would like to talk about the cost of renewable energy. And close to 20 years have passed since we have been promoting renewable energy. It's often said that it's of high cost and unstable. But there are different types of renewable energy available, and you could use it where it's suited. And for cost as well, you see in several years you had seen a dramatic decrease. So we would like to discuss cost of RE, look at the circumstance in the world, how the situation is in Spain. So first of all, I would like to introduce from Bloomberg New Energy Finance lead analyst, Mr. Nakamura. And today, there are a couple of slides which are not included in your handout. And we are having that in the webcast. So it probably will be in the homepage of DJF. You don't need to take photographs of all those slides. So we look forward to your exciting presentation, Mr. Nakamura.
Thank you very much, Mika. And my name is Yugo Nakamura of Bloomberg New Energy Finance. I hope that you will relax and listen to me. So I would like to talk about the cost of renewable energy as a topic, as you see here. These are the bullet points that I will take up. And I would like to talk about not only about Japan, but compare that to what is happening overseas. So this slide. This has been produced by the Japanese government, the National Policy Unit, and this will be the electricity supply scenario of 2010, comparing that with what is going to happen for 2030. So this is the fuel mix of the electricity. So there will be an increase to about 20% of renewables. That's the direction, trajectory for Japan at least. So let's break down this a little bit. On the left-hand side, we're looking at the electricity supply, terawatt hour, and on the right-hand side is the cumulative installed capacity in gigawatts. So comparing 2010, 20, and 2030. So in one word, for whichever renewables, I think the wish is to increase that. And for PV, wind, I think there are great expectations, as you see in this graph. So this is the next slide. And so we've heard, I think, this argument before. And there's one area that I should highlight, and that's the theme of this session, the question of cost. First, so prior to looking at the renewables cost, let's look at the electricity tariff. From 1994 to 2010, looking at the electricity prices prior, excluding the consumption tax. So whether for the residential or commercial and industrial, you see that the tariff has declined. But there has been a sort of increase in 2008 or 9. So in 2010, for residential, it was 21.3. For commercial industrial, 14.6 yen per kilowatt hour. And because the nuclear power plants are not operating, for some of the electric power companies, the tariff has been raised. So therefore, the trajectory or the vector is going up. So remembering the residential electricity prices indicated in orange, and below that in purple, this is the available costs indicated in a range. So this is about the range of the costs for a average utility. So, and then the feed-in tariff is indicated for the various fuels. Right now, the renewables 2% has been introduced. And if more and more is introduced, let's say 20%, also renewable share, can these feed-in tariff levels be maintained? So how should the cost of the renewables come down? That is a question that must be answered by the government itself and for you to think about as well. Now let's look at the current situation concerning costs. So I do understand that this is an extremely busy chart, but the more you chew on it, I think the more you will get the message. This is LCOE, levelized cost of electricity. So, of course, capital expenditure, investment towards electric power production takes an extremely long time. And then the return that can be earned by the investor is so-called IRR, internal rate of return. So therefore, unless there's a sufficient IRR, no one is going to invest in such power production. So at the very bottom, here we have coal-fired, or that's the penultimate, or natural gas at the very bottom. So these at the this is per megawatt hour, and towards the top we have in Japanese yen per kilowatt hour. So let's look at the wind onshore. That's the average prices indicated. This is the range. And then please look at the Japanese yen numbers at the top for you Japanese in the audience. At the bottom is, I think, the dollar indicated. For 2009, so how have the prices or costs trended? This is the kilowatt hour, LCOE. At the start of this year, so this is for PV, the big size, 12.2 yen per kilowatt hour. That's the price or the cost at which PV generation is possible. Now, this is for wind. The offshore, there has been a slight rise in the cost. Concerning onshore, it's about just over 7 yen per kilowatt hour. So the reason why the prices or the costs have not come down is that, particularly in Europe, offshore wind farms, it's very difficult to finance that, and that's one factor. That's the reason why there has been higher prices for offshore wind farms. Concerning onshore, I think the new turbine technologies have been introduced. So these wind turbines, windmills, will provide for greater levels of power generation. But however, I think that wind mill or wind turbine is still in the process of development, and we really don't know how much greater the wind power generation would be from this new design wind mill. Now let's go back to PVs. Concerning the value chain, we start with polysilicon and wafer, then go on to wafers, and then a module is produced. So we look at the prices of the polysilicon. So at the upstream, this is first slide shows the price of the polysilicon from 2012 to the end or the start of 2013. So dollars per kilogram of polysilicon is indicated. So if we look at the trend, the polysilicon has been coming down. Then next, along the value chain, let's look at the silicon module and what's the international spot price for that. As you see, in the past 1 year, there has been a 20% decline in the price of the silicon modules. So therefore, you can say that maybe overall prices at the very end are going up a little because of the reduction in the inventory. The next slide, I don't think you have this, unfortunately. Please look at this on the slide. So 2 slides back, I showed you the polysilicon prices, and then we're looking at the module at the very top. So in each manufacturing process, what's the profit margin enjoyed by the manufacturer or the assembly company? So 0.04 plus. So therefore, all of the manufacturers, assembly companies are suffering from a decline in their profit margins. So the most competitive company may be able to enjoy a profit margin, but the others may be leaving the field, withdrawing from the field. And so in the field of module production, the Chinese companies do have the competitive edge. So on the right at the top, so 62,000 per kilowatt is the price I've indicated. So that's the price for January for a panel, PV panel. Next slide. This, I believe you have. This is the most important portion. Let's look at the system costs, the system prices, including the modules. So for mega solar or for the utility scale PV, and this is on a watt basis, dollars per watt. So at the very bottom is modules, on top inverters, BOP, EPC, and others. So from 2010, every year, we are seeing the situation. So the PV prices, the system prices, have come down quite dramatically. Maybe the price between 2010 and 2012 have halved even. So 2012, the price was, so it was per watt. It was, let's say, $1 is 90 yen. It's about 143,000 yen per kilowatt. And so this is then divided into commercial scale versus residential scale on the right. Next, let's look at the challenges that Japan faces. Let me try to talk about the actual situation in Japan. Bloomberg New Energy Finance has been looking at the various projects in Japan prior to the great earthquake 3/11 of 2 years ago. So for each of the technologies, we've been tracking what sort of projects are planned and then executed. And having tracked that, and we look at whether they've been completed, whether they're on stream or not. The orange line, this is the number of projects, and we are seeing from January of 2011 how the number of projects have increased. So ever since the FIT, the feed-in tariff bill, was passed, there has been a dramatic increase. So we are not looking at the number of filings of the projects. Rather, we're looking at the newspapers and announcements as to the number of projects of over 1 megawatt. Then this is looking at the residential scale solar and the prices of that. And so versus the actual cost, there are some subsidies for that, and there is an upper limit. And so 2009, that subsidy was introduced, and the upper limit on the subsidy has been coming down, as you see on the top line, cascading. But having said that, so if we are looking at the dollar value of that, and then because of the appreciation of the yen, Japan is indicated on orange. The amount if we compare that to the module, which is indicated at the very bottom, Japan is not trending in the same way. This indicates the situation from 08 to 12. And for Germany, indicated in green, as you see, the module price has been coming down in Germany in excess of the decline in module prices. So the German system cost has been coming down quite dramatically. Next slide, which you don't have. So please look at the screen rather than the papers in front of you. This is the mega solar projects in Japan, which have been announced, and this is the size of the project on the horizontal axis. The vertical axis indicates the scale, the magnitude of the projects. So we are looking at the situation compared to from second half of last year, or second half of the year before. So at 2 megawatts, I think there's quite a lot of projects, but then there is a decline. So the red line is the 2 years ago, and the red line is of last year. So therefore, I think cost-wise, there has been it has been coming down. But having said that, so with the introduction of the feed-in tariff, the prices, the costs have been coming down, although I don't quite know which is the egg and which is the hen, the chicken. So it's essential for the feed-in tariff to have a sustainable price setting. So that is to say, for example, so in order to facilitate competition, a price cannot be set which is unattainable or which does not facilitate the installations. So what is the level of the cost that should be chosen? So there has to be serious study given to the appropriate level of these tariff. This slide I will skip. Let's look at the So what are the prices of the PV scale? This is the cost of the system per watt. And here, this is based upon the information from METI. On the extreme right, for 325,000 yen per and this is for projects in excess of 1 megawatt. So there are projects on which approval has been obtained and costs are has been announced. Of course, in some of the projects, the IR is 6%. However, some do include the land purchase as well, or land lease as well. So the system cost has been higher. That is to say, even at this rather high level, I think the investors are willing to go ahead with the PV projects. So because of the feed-in tariff system, and also there are some tax credits, tax incentives. So if those are all utilized, I think there is sufficient return for the investors. So there are various benefits in addition to the feed-in tariff. Now, this next slide, we are looking at the system cost. The horizontal axis is cost, and also what is the feed-in tariff. So this is based upon the procurement committee numbers, and then based upon that I did some my own calculation. So So 352,000 yen. You see a number on the top right. So this was the sort of numbers discussed in the latest discussions in the pricing or procurement committee. So I think this will be the sort of feed-in tariff projections or feed-in tariff for the future. But in fact, as I have explained, concerning PV, there has been a decline in prices, but the feed-in tariff will be maintained and will only be changed once a year. So the feed-in tariff is fixed for a year, and so there are so many sort of areas where the profit margin can be generated. As a graph, this might be hard to fathom, but at the bottom, this is the land lease cost per square meter. And the vertical axis is the project IRR, the internal rate of return, at 325,000 yen per, well, and then comparing that to a project where the actual cost was 273,000. And the orange line indicates an IRR of 6%. So at 325,000 yen, the land lease per square meter would have to be 150 or less in order to make the project profitable. So this again is the question of which is the chicken and which is the egg, but so the land lease cost would have to be lowered in order to make the whole project profitable, and if we are going to earn an internal rate of return of 6%. So this is the current situation the Japanese PB projects are placed in, and I think we have to look at this situation seriously. So this is the last slide. So this is indicated in yen, the feed-in tariff, 35.2, and you have to look at the vertical axis. So at 100. And this is for residential PV. It's about 20, and I've used and if we draw a line at 20, and at that point, I think we will understand what is the appropriate level of the system costs that the Japanese project promoters can pay. Thank you very much. And I'm sure there'll be questions to you. One would be, for the panels, the modules, the prices have been coming down, and there's very heated competition. But then the prices have not been coming down as dramatically in Japan. So as an industry as a whole, the mega solar projects have just started, and I don't think the competition has started in a full-fledged manner concerning how the prices could come down. And also the banks and other institutions who provide the funding, they have to look at a 20-year period. They're very sensitive, very cautious about the risk side, and they may be wary about what sort of modules to use, what sort of manufacturers or what country those modules are produced in. And they may be very wary in terms of the selection of the modules. So if there is more competition, more heated competition, I'm sure the prices would come down much easily. So I think the current feed-in tariff is fixated at a rather high level. And so I think we have to have some policies introduced in order to facilitate, in order to promote competition. We don't want the prices plateauing and not coming down. And so I hope that you will realize that this is the current situation in the FIT right now. Avoided cost. How do you calculate the avoidable cost? 5 yen seems extremely low. So in Japan, I think there is such a range, and so as more renewables increase for the electric power companies, avoidable costs are going to go down. Is it so low? So this is the avoidable cost that's being published for the time being. So I haven't evaluated this or verified this. So right now, I think that's the current situation. That's all I can say about that avoidable cost question. So I think this is the number that the utilities have come out with. Mr. Kaizuka, would you have any comment to what Mr. Nakamura has said? Thank you very much for your detailed analysis. As with Mr. Nakamura, in the PV industry, for modules and devices, I don't think competition has started, at least not heated competition. And as Nakamura-san mentioned, when the banks provide the funds and the financing, they truly evaluate the very items in the projects, and they do try to choose the Japanese manufacturers. And then for the residential PV projects from the 1980s or so, all of those residential PV have been built based upon the subsidies, government subsidies. So there's the manufacturers, the distributors, the local construction companies. The supply chain is ultra long, and everyone tries to make a profit margin from the business that they're involved in. So when overseas manufacturers try to make inroads into the housing construction market, that's not an easy thing to do in Japan. And so overseas manufacturers have had difficulty trying to get into the Japanese housing construction market. So from now on, I believe the price of the module would be coming down with these overseas manufacturers at last making inroads. I believe that is the situation. So concerning overseas manufacturers, when they make inroads into Japan, and they have to provide after service on a very long term, and they have to set up a system, they have to set up branches, after sales service offices in order to provide that service to the households. So concerning wind power, I think 75% is produced overseas, and there's I think a duty or excise tax on that. So in principle, I think there is competition, and I hope that the overseas manufacturers will commit themselves to coming into Japan and not just selling the devices, but providing the after-sales services as well. Thank you. Then later on, I hope that you will participate in the discussion.
Thank you very much. We would like to invite from Spain Mr. Javier San Miguel Armendaris, Manager, Strategy and Business Department of the Spain National Renewable Energy Venture. Please, you have the floor.
Mr. Bayashi, arigato gozaimasu. Ladies and gentlemen, ohayo gozaimasu. I am very grateful and honored to have been invited by JREF to present you a little bit what is the situation in Spain, what have been the developments and the technical challenges that we face. I would like you to watch this picture. because an old and wise person once told me that for the important things in life, you should follow your heart. And since energy plays such an intrinsical important role in our lives, maybe it's also one of them. So sometimes we might face difficulties, but when we really follow something that we want, we should be able to overcome the problems. So I will present rapidly through quite a few slides, but I will just give you the highlights. What is the evolution of renewables in Spain, how the European regulation framework has driven these developments as well, and what are the current technological challenges that we are working on. So, Spain is an energy-dependent country, as the picture shows, and that is quite a big problem. So, in that respect, we suffer the same problem that Japan does. But Spain has, well, good renewable energy resources, and when I say good, they are not extremely good, they are not the best in the world, but they are evenly distributed, and solar and wind tend to balance each other. So taking both of them, they can be part of the solution to our energy dependence. It is interesting to watch this graph because it shows that during the past decade, the energy matrix in Spain has changed. So when we had initially carbon and nuclear, the rate of development of new plants has changed towards gas and renewables that are configuring the new matrix. And this has had, obviously, an effect on the decreasing emissions. Okay, in this slide, I just want to point out that actually renewable energy produces a very important amount of the generated power in Spain. So if we look at the graph on the right, the green bars, the renewable energy share, it does include also hydroelectric, amounts to 33% of the total generated power in Spain. The energy matrix of installed capacity, it shows that we have 40% of our installed capacity in renewables, including hydroelectric. And what is also a very interesting figure is this 59% of wind energy generation that amounted well, to 50% of the demand at a certain instant. So the system was capable of integrating all this amount of wind power without major disruption. In this figure, it is the projection of our government of how the renewable energy cost might come down and how they actually converge to the general conventional generation cost. So grid parity is going to be a reality for most renewables. But I would say more. Here we see an asymptotic convergence. But as soon as renewable energies start being having a significant contribution in the energy usage of the country, what we will have is probably more than a convergence. We will have a crossover. Okay, this is in Spanish, but the figures are international. And what I want to show is that between 2010, what is the actual amount for all technologies? It is remarkable, the amount of offshore wind that we have installed, that it amounts around 21 gigawatts. But how, for 2020, still the targets are very ambitious. Practically, we want to double wind power. Practically, we want to double photovoltaics. And this is interesting because, as you probably know, due to the economic financial crisis, things have changed considerably in Spain. But still the figures are held. So I'm just going to give you a very brief outlook of what has happened in Spain with this slide and explains a little bit what the situation is now. So there are different factors that are affecting renewables in Spain, and as I point out in the title, they are in the doldrums. At the moment, nothing is being developed in Spain. But we still feel that there will be developments, but there is an adjustment phase. So what has brought out this stagnation in the renewables energy market? Well, obviously, renewable projects are capital intensive, so the financial crisis is a big obstacle. There is overabundant capacity because due to the financial crisis and the economic crisis, the energy consumption is less, so we have energy overcapacity. I have put within quotes retroactive, meaning retrospective, but that is an interpretation because obviously in the policies at some point it was pointed out that changes could be made in the future, always trying to guarantee reasonable profits, but obviously, as you probably know, the profits in renewables in Spain have been spectacular, I would say too much, and therefore some changes have been introduced. So now we have changes in incentives that are currently in international arbitration. We have a moratorium in renewable incentives, so that means that there are no more feed-in tariffs for renewables. So renewables are competing in the market with conventional technologies now. And a 6% generation tax has been introduced for all technologies, both renewables and conventional. For the existing plants, there has been an introduction of, less flexibility in choosing which method of remuneration you choose for your project. We have a net energy balance law that was going to come out but has been frozen for the moment. And we have a huge tariff deficit, which some people blame on renewables. Renewables obviously amount to it, but basically it comes from the way that tariffs were defined by the government a few years ago. So the finance cost of this deficit is also jeopardizing some developments. But amongst all this, I would say that there's still a very important thing that holds and hopefully will be important for further renewable development, and is priority of access. Renewables will continue having priority of access, and that is possible because in Spain we have a very well consolidated electrical network, and also we have an energy matrix with gas generation that allows for the balance. So very briefly, I would just say that the European network framework has been very important for driving renewable energy developments, and that the 20% of total energy consumption objective for 2020 still holds. These objectives are closely watched, and also they are supported by a set plan and a strategic energy plan, which has a budget of 31,000 million euros for the next few years, and which are shared by different companies in a competitive basis. These are just some highlights of that strategic energy plan, and how centers like CENER, the Spanish Renewable Energy Center, find these guidelines as the key for their strategic lines of research. So here I will just explain next, but I will point out that energy efficiency is also one of them. And well, this driving European network in the end shows in the installed capacity, where it shows that, well, coal is basically not growing as much as it did in the past, and wind, PV, gas have been the favored technologies. And this trend that we have seen in Europe obviously is all over the world, and I believe that even if feed-in tariffs or incentives, well, they go up or they disappear, the general development of the technology will continue, because renewables are a knowledge-driven technology, and our knowledge will continue increasing, the cost will continue coming down, and they will become increasingly competitive. So I think the snowball will not stop. So let's look at those technical challenges and developments that can help us to continue developing renewables, even if the incentives or support are less than in the past. So wind power has developed all over the world, and so it has done in Spain, as I mentioned before. We have reached over, well, nearly 22 gigawatts, and that has been done by a wide variety of developers and manufacturers that have been involved in this business. So we as a technical center have supported developers with the tools that they need to assess their resources, both in wind, solar, with wind maps, solar maps, but also with forecasting tools that allow a pretty accurate prediction of what's going to be the power generation from these sources. I would say that even with the aggregate performances of different wind and solar plants, these predictions can be very accurate, maybe within a margin of 10% error maximum. Also, the developments in wind turbine technologies are fundamental, and here I would like to point out our interest in the deep water floating concepts. Here Spain shares the same problematic as Japan does, with wide deep seas around us, and we believe that for the next decade these solutions could be not only an opportunity for our country, or like they are for Japan, but also they are an export opportunity for both countries. Well, probably if you have not seen it yet, you will see it later on, but the cost of wind turbines is one of the most important parts of a wind project, and we believe that improving the way that we validate the technology, the way that we test it, and how we can increase their reliability can help reduce the cost of wind energy projects greatly. So for that purpose, it is very important to have facilities that can help to test the main components like blades, transmissions, and the whole turbines. So in photovoltaics, I would like to point out, well, a controversial sometimes merit of order effect. And I have taken one report that was published in Germany where it shows that actually the prices in the pool can be cut at certain points up to 40% thanks to the introduction of photovoltaic energy, because photovoltaics, as you see in the picture below, they coincide in their peak of generation with the peak of demand, and this has a competitive effect on the generation pool, bringing down the prices. So customers should also benefit from this effect, and maybe it should not be left only to the utilities to benefit from it. Okay, the technical challenges in photovoltaics, they are overall focused on the reduction of silicon use. Obviously, manufacturing efficiency is improving, and I would say that photovoltaics will have to face the challenge of competing directly with the energy price in the pool with conventional technologies. So this is going to be so in Spain, and nevertheless, I would say that there are up to 10 gigawatts of petitions to the transmission system operator for huge PV parks to be connected. So obviously this has been on hold now because of the financial crisis, but I would say watch the space, because probably some of the biggest PV installations in the world will be developed in Spain in the next decade. So it's going to be interesting because they will go to market without any incentives. In solar thermal, I would say that it's a bit more expensive technology than photovoltaics, but it has the big advantage of covering the peak of demand very closely, thanks to the ability of having thermal storage. So in that sense, a thermal solar plant can be the equivalent of a PV plant plus a gas plant. So maybe a little bit more investment can be worth it, and so do we believe in Spain. And for that reason, our center has been involved with the development of the different technologies. And currently, we are focused on the development of the tower concepts. Tower concepts because the efficiency of concentrated solar power in towers can be higher thanks to higher temperatures that can be reached in the receptors. And also the rest of the plant is a conventional plant. So there could be synergic benefits with the rest of the technologies. In biomass, for us, is also important because we see the opportunity to generate biofuels from lignocellulosic products through gasification processes. This could also be hybridated with electrolytic hydrogen from renewable energy installations like wind and solar. So we believe that there is still an important room for research and development in this area. Finally, grid integration. I know this is a very hot issue here in Japan, and I would say that in Spain, although we have a very good central grid system, still we believe that local solutions like microgrids could be of great interest because they can help reduce the standby thermal capacity and the load shedding needs. So the control at local level can help increase the penetration of renewable energies like grid and solar, combined with conventional sources of generation. So for all this, the key is storage systems. So we are exploring different types of storage systems, from lithium-ion batteries to vanadium redox flow batteries or standard lead-acid batteries, and we are combining them with the renewable energy sources, diesel, gas, and trying to find flexible platforms that can provide these general solutions at distributed level. Okay, so thank you very much. Arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you very much for the presentation. So I do have a couple of questions, but it was yesterday. Nakamura-san, you were not present, Nagata-san either, but we talked about renewable energy cost and reform. We had a closed meeting, actually, and many of the speakers were present. And in that, Irina had come up with a study paper, and Mizuno-san had conducted analysis. And in Japan, the price of wind power is not going down. From 2005, it started to go up. In other countries, it went down once, but we don't see that in Japan. That was what was discussed yesterday. So compared to overseas and Japan, the gap of cost same for PV as well. Nakamura-san, what is your comment to that? So especially wind power? And Nagata-san, if you can have a comment from you as well. So Nagata-san knows more about the field. So I learn a lot from him always. But one thing is that there are different regulation barriers. And as was shown, and well, improvements in environment easy for operators would be necessary. That's one thing that we need to see improve. And also, as a resource for wind power and the wind condition, good wind conditions and sites that can provide that, may not always have the grid capacity in the area. So that may take time to resolve, but as Mr. Takahara was saying, in specified areas, it could be that against transmission line, there could be certain efforts, and such activities have started, so we'll have expectations to that. And furthermore, the natural condition and the unique Japanese natural conditions is also topology. There are Japan unique difficulties, and we would need to look into that. And there are complex factors which still have the high cost situation. That's how I understand it. So do you think that there's a lot of Japanese unique aspects, factors that lead to this? Can you say that again, please? So do you think that, I think overseas, as we look at biomass, if we think of good thermal strategy, there's a lot of policies that could move on for biomass electricity. But in Japan, it seems that there are different regulations and also a lot of red tape, and it's encompassed as a package, and you have to cope with all those different procedures. And there are a lot of restrictions that may not be apparent. So I think overseas it's a lot more simple to promote RE. There are systems which can allow for the promotion. Do you think that is the case? For wind power, unfortunately, so when we switch over from RPS to FIT, the subsidy for investment had stopped. And after that subsidy was terminated, FIT started. So those bankers and those providing finance had to again start with the effort, and also EIA was another factor. So I think we are to start 22 yen, the FIT, within the FIT price of such new deals, new projects are not appearing. And if that continues, I think within that restriction we need to look at individual items and aspects to see what the issues are and try to improve the condition. That kind of effort, I believe, would be required.
Nagata-san? When the feed-in tariff was announced, there was questions from our overseas colleagues. Why is it so high? And at that time, I mean, there are some special conditions in Japan, and in a way I was finding excuses, and particularly when the FIT was announced, the yen was extremely high, although it has depreciated ever since. And of course the structure has to be seismic. There's quite a lot of lightning, thunder in this country, and there has to be countermeasures against that. And that's the reason why I think the cost, the tariff is higher. And also when the tsunami struck, the wind mills along the coast did survive the tsunami. So therefore, you could say that the construction guidelines were high enough, were stringent enough, so that those windmills did survive the very high and big tsunami that struck Japan along the coast. Also, most of the installations, wind farms, are less than 5 wind mills, rather small, and so there is no economies of scale that are enjoyed. Also, concerning the wind resources, load factor, in terms of the load factor, it's about 20%, I think, compared to 25% or so load factor amongst the European wind farms. So if we look at the absolute numbers, I don't think it's really meaningful to have the look at the cost and compare that Japan is so high. I think we have to look at the cost in comparison to the grid parity. So compared to the tariff, existing tariff of the electric power companies, and what sort of tariff can we provide? Wind power, maybe less than maybe 20 yen or so, 18 or 19 yen. So for the large-scale wind power generation, I think that level is being approximated. So I know that we can look at international comparisons and say that power prices in these countries are much less than Japan, but so compared to the average tariff of that particular country A, what is the price at which the renewables are generating electricity? I think we should look at the relative situation rather than an absolute international comparison between Japan and other countries. And I think cost-wise, I think we are fully in a situation to push forward with renewables. And concerning the question of grid parity, I think we should aim for it. We should shoot for it. And I think we can compete head-on with nuclear. So wind, PV. So I think there is value here that fossil fuel does not have. And I think somewhere in the market mechanism, that merit or that virtue should be recognized. So I think compared to fossil fuel, there is so much virtue that the renewables can provide in terms of alleviating climate change and others. So I do hope that somewhere in the market mechanism, somewhere in economics, we can give value to this characteristic of renewables. So in this day and age of higher crude oil prices, I hope that someone will put value on renewables. I think we have passed the time. I thought that I had 10 more minutes, but so we did touch upon a bit on biomass. Mr. Kajiyama, perhaps you could make a comment or two on the subject of biomass.
Yes, so it is true that Japan has its unique conditions, but I think we cannot just blame everything for that. We can't conclude with that, because for PB, for example, in Germany it's high, but it's still higher because we have longer sunshine hours compared to Germany, 20 to 30%. So that also would need to be incorporated and accommodated. So now there are a couple of factors that we need to look at. So one thing is we want to make sure that there's transparency. In Germany, so there are different associations for wind power and solar. And regarding cost, they have detailed analysis and data disclosed. And for system cost as well, on the homepage, information is provided. So through that, we see that for 1 kilowatt or so, 1,700 euro or so, close to 200,000 yen. So if you could look at the homepage, you will be able to have that information depending on where you live and what direction the roof is facing. Looking at that, and with the zip code entered, etc., you'll be able to know the annual power generation and system cost, and that calculation comes out automatically. And if that is available, those who want to have panels can make judgment. They can have the vendors come up with a quote, and they can judge whether that's expensive or not. And that's not available in Japan yet. If you go to big camera, for example, 400,000 yen per kilowatt is the price that you'll get is a surprisingly high figure. And also, research institutes can play a very important role as well. And I'm sure Dr. Aramidaris will agree to this. Good support from the research institutes are necessary. Now, in Japan, where is that? I don't think there is no such scheme. And RE is a new field, so nobody really knows all the details. So everyone are, so to speak, lay people. And there are different things that come in because of that. And no one can really judge. So I think since we want to create a social system, we need to have an overall picture. And also, the fit price also is an issue as well. And for PV generation, for example, so the land price is determined. So 3 to 6 yen per kilowatt would need to be paid for land prices. Such models do exist. And also basically, even if we talk about mega solar, if you have a massive assets and capitals, it would be huge amounts. And for individuals, or there's difficulty in regional investment to take place, and we need to lower the threshold or barrier, and we need a system to support that. And looking at Europe, so there are projects where large investment is required and mega-scale wind power, and those could be done on the local investment, leading to less cost. There's a clear demarcation. And in total, the overall costs are suppressed and reduced. I think that's something that we need to remember as well. And the local sites, through wind power, they can't get much because of 1 or 2 windmills, because there's a lot of maintenance cost. So merits of scale would be required to have a certain number of windmills in the region, and try to have maintenance on their own is necessary. And in Germany, you'll see that example. So we need to be creative in how we can bring down cost. Thank you.
原先生、いかがでしょうか。
Hara-san? Hara-san? Go. If you look at the cost, we have to look at the period. And the longer you run the wind power, the lower the cost will become. And Mr. Takahara, the DG, was saying that there's no difference where the fossil. So it's 6 to 7 yen, the longer the plant is running. And concerning the geothermal too, so this has not been developed all that much. And so with more and more geothermal power generation, I'm sure the cost will be coming down. Thank you. Lastly, you've been hearing about the situation in Japan. Perhaps you could, Xavier San Miguel, if you could talk about the situation and the difference between Japan and Spain.
Well, as I mentioned in my presentation, the key difference is that, well, you are starting now with the experience of the feed-in tariffs, and we just came out of the experience of the feed-in tariffs. I mean, as I mentioned, there's no more feed-in tariff in Spain for new projects. This is a trend that I think is going to be seen in many places, not only in Spain. Germany is now looking at reducing incentives. Italy will do. The United States is always wary of them. And the truth is that renewables have developed to an extent where they are starting being more competitive. Obviously, the capital investment needed for the development of these projects is not local money, it's international money, money that moves all over the world very quickly and goes wherever finds the biggest incentive. So in that respect, the market, the global market is always distorted by the incentives wherever they are. But as I said in my presentation, I think in Spain, although we are now in free fall or in the doldrums, so no new developments are happening, the priority of access will be maintained because the energy matrix allows for it. And I believe that there will be some new important renewable energy installations. I don't know when, but I think before the end of the decade. And maybe some of them will be surprising because maybe we will see some big solar parks or wind parks that will go to market, will go to the pool. So I think it is probably a trend worth watching close because it might be revealing for what could be the policies of the future in the rest of the world. So yes, I think maybe Japan can also learn not only from the things we made, also from the mistakes and try to get it right.
ありがとうございます。
Thank you.
話していただいたドイツも日本とはやっぱり
Spain and Germany, compared to Japan, has introduced a lot of renewable energy. There's a lot that we can learn from both of you. So sorry we've extended the time. We'd like to close the morning session. So in the afternoon, we will be talking about the electricity system reform. And we will resume from 2 p.m. Thank you very much for your attention. This closes the morning session.
スピーカーの皆さん、モデレーターの大林さん、ありがとうございました。これでセッション2を終了いたします。これよりランチ休憩とさせていただきます。本ビル地下1階及び地上1階にレストランがございます。昼食は各自でお済ませいただき、午後の部再開までにお戻りください。プログラムの再開は午後2時を予定しております。休憩の間、会場はクローズとさせていただきます。再開場は13時30分、午後1時30分となります。お手回りのお荷物などはお席にお残しにならないようお願い申し上げます。また、お使いになりました同時通訳レシーバーは、会場出入り口にてご返却いただき、会場の外へ持ち出されませんようお願いいたします。ご記入いただきましたアンケート用紙は、お帰りの際に出口におりますスタッフにお渡しください。本日の発表資料につきましては、後日、財団のホームページに掲載いたします。それでは、これで午前の部は終了いたします。ありがとうございました。